Can a single Grand Prix destroy the aspirations of a historic team like Ferrari in Formula One? What happened at Interlagos that turned a promising weekend into a red nightmare? Ferrari's arrival in Brazil felt like a turning point. After 2 consecutive weekends in which Charles Leclerc had returned to the podium, first in Austin and then in Mexico, it seemed that the Scuderia was finally finding the right path. In Maranello, the mood was one of cautious hope. Frédéric Vasseur, the team manager, had made it clear in previous interviews that the team's focus was on closing the year strong, defending its place as the second-best team in the Constructors Championship. With a car that, although limited, had shown certain recent improvements on medium-load circuits, optimism was not unfounded. But all that positive momentum was, in reality, an illusion that was about to crumble. Brazil, and in particular Interlagos, represents one of the toughest tests for any car. Internally, at Ferrari they knew that Interlagos would not be their best place. However, the team hoped to minimize damage, trusting that their recent operational strength, something that historically had cost them a lot, would allow them to at least maximize what little they had. In theory, a weekend without strategic errors, without failures in the pits, without reliability problems, could keep them in the fight. But that theory was shattered before the first competitive round began. From the start of the weekend, it was clear that Ferrari had underestimated the complexity of the challenge. And the most worrying thing, they had once again made a basic mistake, one of those mistakes that cannot be corrected with a perfect qualifying lap or a good start. Because when the car doesn't respond, when your technical base is not solid, it doesn't matter how much talent you have behind the wheel or how fine-tuned the team is in the pits. If your car doesn't perform on the kind of track that punishes your weak points, everything falls apart. Friday at Interlagos was not just a bad day for Ferrari. It was an uncomfortable revelation that the foundations on which the recent run of podium finishes had been built were more fragile than previously thought. On a sprint weekend like the one in Brazil, where there is only one practice session before entering directly into qualifying, every second on the track counts. And Ferrari started with a completely twisted foot. From the first lap of FP1, it was clear that the SF25 was not fit to compete. While the leading teams worked with medium and soft compounds to understand the behavior of the tire in real track conditions, Ferrari opted for a disconcerting strategy, going exclusively with the hard compound. This decision, perhaps designed to save tires or simulate high degradation scenarios, ended up condemning them. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton finished the session in 18th and 19th positions, totally disconnected from a competitive rhythm, without useful data to configure the car for qualifying. They had wasted their only window of real learning. The worst was yet to come. With so little room for adjustments, Ferrari entered the sprint classification blindly, without having corrected the imbalances that were already evident. The result was a chaotic session that starkly revealed the structural defects of the SF25. The car suffered from a dual behavior that was unbearable for the driver. Aggressive understeer at the entrance of the corners, that is, the nose of the car refused to turn, and sudden oversteer at the exit, the rear losing grip just when power was applied. This combination is lethal on a circuit like Interlagos, where the pace depends on the car's fluid balance between the technical sequences of the second sector. Leclerc barely managed to survive SQ2 with a dramatic spin that left him on the brink of elimination. Hamilton, for his part, was not so lucky. He fell into the same SQ2, without rhythm, without confidence, without answers. His message upon getting out of the car was crude. The team thought we were much faster than we really are. And he was right. The telemetry data confirmed that the Ferrari was losing between 5 and 6 kilometers per hour compared to its rivals with the DRS closed. This was not simply a question of engine power, but a direct consequence of the high downforce wings that Ferrari needed to fit to compensate for its lack of vertical downforce. That is, to keep the car glued to the ground in slow corners, they had to sacrifice all efficiency on the straight. The result was a car completely defenseless in the fastest sections of the track. As if this were not enough, Leclerc revealed after qualifying that he had suffered a gear shift system failure during his fastest lap in SQ3. The car denied him a gear right on the main straight, costing him approximately a tenth and a half. Although he himself admitted that this would not have gained him many positions, the message was clear. Even when the driver did his part, the car was not up to the task. The technical situation was more serious than it seemed. Ferrari was not only facing a performance deficit, but a disconnect between what the car needed and what the team believed it had delivered. This disconnect is a worrying sign for any Formula One structure. When your simulator says one thing and the track says another, you're lost. And that's how Friday closed for Ferrari. No rhythm, no balance, no answers. What should have been a weekend to consolidate second place in Constructors was turning into a painful lesson about the limits of their technical project. Black Friday at Interlagos was not an accident. It was the inevitable consequence of unresolved design errors and strategic decisions that reflected an absolute lack of clarity about the true capabilities of the SF25. After Friday's disaster, Saturday's sprint was presented as a minimal, almost symbolic opportunity for Ferrari to recover some ground. The sprint format, with fewer laps, no mandatory pit stops, and no complex strategies, reduces the impact of certain structural factors of the car. In theory, this could favor Ferrari. But what happened was a mere mirage, a momentary illusion of competitiveness that in reality masked all of SF25's underlying problems. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton achieved good starts. They took advantage of other people's mistakes and survived the initial chaos caused by Oscar Piastri's accident to gain positions. Leclerc crossed the finish line in 5th position, Hamilton in 7th. On paper, it was an acceptable result. But in practice, these points barely served to disguise a much more worrying technical reality. From the first lap, it was evident that Ferrari had no weapons to fight in real racing conditions. Leclerc spent more than 15 laps trapped behind Fernando Alonso without being able to overtake him. Despite having at times marginally better pace in clean air, the speed deficit on the straight was so overwhelming that even with DRS activated, I couldn't close enough to try. That strategic impotence, that prolonged stagnation in the middle of the pack, was a silent condemnation. Hamilton, for his part, lived a similar career. He achieved one of his best starts so far this season, positioning himself well on the first lap. After the red flag, caused by Piastri's accident, the pace was somewhat more consistent. But that momentum also faded when he found himself in the same aerodynamic trap as his teammate. No top speed, no balance to attack corners, no room to improvise. The lack of overtaking ability was not a matter of the driver's lack of aggressiveness. It was purely and exclusively a consequence of the structural limitations of the car. The SF25 was forced to run with such high downforce to compensate for its lack of cornering stability that it simply did not have the tools to compete on a track like Interlagos, where aerodynamic efficiency and terminal speed make the difference. Every attempt to get closer to a rival was frustrated by the lack of traction on corner exits and stagnation in maximum acceleration. And although from the outside some could interpret the sprint as a sign of recovery, internally at Ferrari no one was deceived. They knew it. That result was not sustainable in the long race. Because what they had really achieved that Saturday was not a structural improvement to the car, nor a technical solution to its problems. What happened was the circumstantial result of a clean start and the abandonment of a more competitive car in front. Fred Vasseur's words after the race were revealing. He admitted that the team had made an evaluation error at the start of the weekend. Trusting in possible rain, they configured the cars for low downforce on Friday, a decision that heavily penalized their performance. Only after the sprint were they able to partially correct that mistake, but by then, they had already mortgaged any real chance of fighting ahead. The sprint was not a rebirth. It was a disguise, a momentary mask that covered a deep problem. The pace they showed was more a product of survival than competitiveness. And most alarming, there was no real indication that this car could hold its own in a full Sunday race. Ferrari was not only trapped in its technical limitations, it was also trapped in a spiral of reactive decisions, trying to correct previous mistakes while rivals fine-tuned their machinery for the main race. The team's strategy didn't help either. Ferrari had planned a two-stop race, trying to keep Hamilton in clean air with a long first stint on medium tires. However, the degradation was much worse than anticipated. In just 15 laps, the compound had been completely destroyed, and Hamilton began to lose more than a second per lap compared to the leading group. Radio communication became tense. Vasseur asked for calm, but Hamilton responded in a frustrated tone. "I can't drive this car like this. I have no traction. I have no stability. I have nothing." The first stop came on lap 19, but even after the switch to hard tires, the problems persisted. The gearbox began to show irregularities. The sensors detected unusual temperature spikes, and the gears began to resist when downshifting. On lap 30, while attempting to pass George Russell on the main straight, the car lost traction exiting turn 12, the engine over-revved, and the SF25 suddenly went into neutral. Hamilton attempted to restart the system, but to no avail. The transmission had completely failed. The Briton parked the car to the side in the escape area. He didn't scream, he didn't hit the steering wheel. He only stood still for a few seconds, looking ahead, with his helmet still on. It was an image that said all: helplessness, frustration, and a feeling that the team had hit rock bottom. The double abandonment meant more than a loss of points. It was a direct wound to Ferrari's pride. They went from being second in the Constructors Championship to falling to fourth place, overtaken by Mercedes and threatened by Red Bull. In a single weekend, the work of the entire second half of the year had evaporated. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.